Competitiveness, a word that is at the very core of Formula One's existence, and a word that is causing Formula One to enter crisis. Let's not beat around the bush. Competition in F1 has been dwindling for quite a while now. And as we've seen this season, F1 runs the risk of becoming predictable. Oh, the last thing a high-intensity sport wants to be. Let's put it this way. If you had £1,000 to bet on a team to win the Constructors Championship this year, who would you put it on? To be frank with you, I think you'd be delusional if you picked any other team than Red Bull. And this is bad for the sport. There's no two ways about it. Competitiveness is what makes the sport worth watching in the first place. F1 is supposed to be one of the most exciting sports on the planet, not one of the most predictable. Believing that no other team can win, because how on earth could any mortal human being challenge Red Bull right now, is, simply put, boring. The sport will lose its magic, so it's clear something needs to change. But what? In 2021, F1 established a cost cap to diminish the sport's inequalities. You see, money directly influences F1 teams' chances to win. Historically, the teams with the most money could hire the best professionals to make the best cars and components. Having the best meant they had more chance of winning the Constructors Championship and taking even more money home. It also meant it was easier to get sponsors. I mean, after all, who doesn't want to bet on a winning team? This created a loop where the money you spent, the more you gained. As a result, teams with less money became in last place, figuratively and literally. So F1 followed in the footsteps of football, the NFL and the NBA and set a cost cap. But let's cut the bullshit for a second. You've got to be having a laugh if you think the cost cap functions as it's intended. There's no two ways about it. While it is a step in the right direction, it's nonetheless a deeply flawed system that does not achieve what it's supposed to, which we'll explore very shortly. The cost cap works like this. Teams' budgets are divided into performance and non-performance. Performance is the money teams spend on cars and components. That includes things like car design and development, component manufacturing, testing and race operations, and the majority of employee salaries, but not all. The original plan was a cap of $175 million, but due to COVID, this reduced to $145 million. Still, the cap's not fixed. It changes every year. The progressive reduction gives teams time to scale down their operations. In 2022, the cost cap became $140 million, and in 2023, it became $135 million. Just so you have an idea of the cap's impact, consider this. The average expenditure for an F1 team before the cap was between $250 and $300 million, which means some teams had their budget reduced by half. But it's clear this is still not enough. So what's going on? Well, hasn't this resolved the issue of competitiveness? We'll get into this very shortly. But what about non-performance expenses? There's no cap for them. They include marketing, driver salaries, salaries of the highest 3 paid employees, and engine development, and many other things that leave a big margin for ambiguity. But we'll talk about this later. So how does F1 ensure teams are complying with the cap? An independent auditor monitors the team's expenses. If a team breaks the rules, they undergo what's supposed to be a severe punishment. There are 3 tiers of punishment according to different levels of rule breaking. First, if the team submits their accounts late or incorrectly, they receive a financial punishment decided upon in each situation. For example, at the beginning of 2022, Williams failed to deliver its accounts on time and ended up with a fine of $25,000. Second, if the team commits a minor spending issue, less than 5% more than the budget cap, they receive a sporting punishment. These could be anything between reduced points, less wind tunnel time, or a race ban. And third, if the team exceeds 5% of the budget cap, they could be expelled from the World Championship. With such severe rules, one would think teams would shy away from breaking them. But that's not the reality. When Red Bull submitted the reports in March of 2022, the FIA noticed something wrong. Turns out, in 2021, the team breached the cap by less than 5% over the limit. They were the champions that year, so people questioned if they'd lose the title. Fortunately for them, that was not the case. But still, they suffered some consequences. The team had to pay a $7 million fine, and they had a 10% reduction in wind tunnel and CFD time. Forget the $1 million fine, that penalty is a joke. Fining Red Bull $7 million is a drop in the ocean for them, and the penalty they'd happily take for the development advantage gained. Someone please tell the FIA financial penalties do nothing to deter teams from breaking the rules. Money is not an issue for these teams. The reduction in wind tunnel time might impact this season, but it's not as much as you might think. The thing is, Red Bull does not need to make a massive overhaul to their cars like other teams. Why? Because they had such a strong car coming into the season, helped in part by the unfair overspend on development. The RB19 is so superior to other cars that Red Bull only need little testing to make minor tweaks and adjustments rather than overhauling their entire front wing, for example, which requires a lot of testing time. So this limitation affects Red Bull less than you might think. In a world where they were able to overspend in a car that won them the championship by up to $7 million, you have to ask whether this punishment is severe enough. That amount of money goes a long way on a car's development and needs to be punished accordingly. If a team breaches the cost cap, there needs to be a heftier sporting penalties. Make the penalties actually hurt the team's chances of winning. Don't fine them money. Ban them from several races. Deduce a hefty amount of points, or at least give them several severe grid penalties. But what happened really? Did Red Bull gain an unfair advantage? Did they cheat? According to the FIA, it was all an honest mistake. At the beginning of 2021, the FIA offered a test run consolidation to make sure all teams met the cost cap requirements. Red Bull officials felt on top of their game, so they refused the consultation, and the result was catastrophic. As I mentioned, there's a lot of ambiguity in the rules. You have examples from the cap, but they're vaguely described as all financial costs and all property costs. This can generate many misunderstandings. In Red Bull's case, they believed there were more things that counted as exemptions than in reality. Who knows whether it was an honest mistake or not? What I do know though is that the penalties need to be harsher. But if you thought Red Bull's breach was bad, just wait. There are two problems that, if not resolved, make the cost cap completely redundant: unfair financial distribution and contract loopholes. Simply put, the cost cap is not sufficient to address the structural inequalities in the sport. Larger and more established teams still have an advantage in terms of resources, personnel, and infrastructure that smaller teams struggle to match. Especially because the way Formula One divides the money between teams is completely unfair. It's estimated the money involved in distribution reaches $1 billion. This money is divided into 3 payments to teams. The first payment is called Column 1. It works like this. Each team that has participated in at least 2 of the last 3 seasons gets an equal share of the amount. Everyone gets a piece of the pie, nice and fair. Then there's Column 2, distribution of money based on performance. The winner of the Constructors Championship gets the biggest share, and that last place gets the smallest. Seems fair enough. But there's one last payment, and this is where things get messy. Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren receive an additional payment as Constructors Championship bonus. This is due to a negotiation with Bernie Ecclestone to ensure big teams would commit long term. Then Red Bull gets another bonus for being the first to commit long term to the sport in this decade. But Mercedes also wanted a dirty deal and cooked up another extra payment due to their back-to-back championships in 2014 and 2015. Lastly, Williams has a heritage payment of $10 million. It's small compared to others, but given that the team has the worst performance overall, this makes a difference. Then comes the biggest payout. Ferrari gets an extra payment which is bigger than the share for whoever wins the Constructors Championship. This deal was made in recognition of Ferrari's participation in every F1 championship since the beginning of 1950. With this deal, the total amount Ferrari gets is a whopping 1/5 of the total F1 money, and the last team only gets 25% of Ferrari's payment. Ferrari's feat is certainly impressive, but fair? I'm not so sure. But there's more. As I've said, exemption costs are quite ambiguous, and they allow teams to overspend. When you exclude the exemptions, the top three teams, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, still spend far more than the $135 million cap. Then there's the loopholes. With these, teams can move the cost of one area into another to get round the cap. Companies can use resources and development technologies outside of F1 to bring them back later on, or even employ people in other racing competitions and use their knowledge in F1. Sounds shady to me. There were rumours Aston Martin used this loophole to gain performance outside of Formula One's regular operations. Big teams like Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes run big operations in other sports, so they can use their teams in other racing sports to develop for F1 and create an unfair advantage. By doing that, it's as if officially the team has 60 employees, but unofficially 800 more are working behind the scenes. With such a massive advantage, it's easy to see why the same teams keep winning championships over and over again. 7 times in a row in Mercedes' case, and who knows how long Red Bull will dominate for. And this is a huge problem for the sport. It's clear the cost cap doesn't fully address the revenue disparities between teams, especially when it comes to prize money and sponsorships. The penalties for breaching it are sort of a joke. Simply put, they need to be harsher. And if F1 doesn't do anything about the unfair distribution of money or the loopholes in the regiment, the cap will become almost useless. The sport will lose its competitive nature little by little. To ensure success, the cost cap needs to complement other measures that address the underlying structural inequalities in the sport. This could include revenue sharing, where a portion of the sport's revenue is distributed more equally among teams, or other forms of financial redistribution that help level the playing field. If financial inequalities in F1 have made you outraged, prepare. There's nothing compared to the sport's corruption scandals and immoral sponsors. You're going to want to watch this video.